On August 23rd of 1305, Sir William Wallace of Scotland was executed for treason against the English crown after having spent much of his life fighting English rule of his homeland. 690 years later, the film Braveheart, depicting much of Wallace's life and his rebellion against the English, was released. The film was very well received and has won numerous awards and honors. However, it is also considered one of the most untrue tellings of a true story put to film. But how much is right? How much is wrong? How accurate is Braveheart? Now, we're not going to go over everything, but we do hope to get you the important bullet points. The film opens on the life of a young William Wallace, the son of farmers whose father and brother are killed by the English when he is still a small boy. In fact, Wallace was born into the lesser nobility of Scotland, was well educated, and both his parents lived into his early adult life. That is about all we know for sure about Wallace's life before the rebellion, which for him started in May of 1297, which is the first battle depicted in the film, sometimes referred to as the Action at Lanark. The incident in the film reasonably matches a description written around 60 years after the fact. The sheriff of Lanark was holding a court at which a fight broke out involving Wallace, but he was able to escape with the help of a young woman, sometimes referred to as his wife, but then later returned with supporters and killed the sheriff and his men. The movie makes it pretty clear that Wallace was motivated by the murder of his wife. However, we aren't totally sure if his wife even existed, and it is very possible that this attack was a more coordinated effort in relation with similar uprisings taking place all over Scotland. The next scene, based on a major real-life event, was the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which was a critical Scottish victory and the highlight of Wallace's military career. And, as the name suggests, the battle was fought primarily on a bridge, which is totally absent from the film. And as a result of that, pretty much everything about the battle in the film is fictional. But it's still a good speech.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Following the victory, Wallace is appointed a guardian of Scotland, and then proceeds to raid northern England, and although he would not have made it as far south as York or kill the king's nephew, fear did set in northern England, and King Edward led an army north to Scotland in response. They met at the Battle of Falkirk, where the English thoroughly defeated Wallace and ended his military career, but the same as with Stirling, the tactics used in the movie are nothing like the actual battle. In reality, the Scots were simply overwhelmed by the larger English force, which possibly included Robert the Bruce, the future King of Scotland, but there were no Irish troops present, and the field was not covered with tar and then set on fire. And the Scottish lords did not betray Wallace and his men. The Scottish cavalry did flee the battlefield, but it was at the end of the battle, and simply because they too were overwhelmed by the superior English troops. Following the loss, the movie shows Wallace embark on a vengeful, bloody guerrilla war against the English and the nobles who betrayed him, and also plenty of mountain climbing. Again, the filmmakers are filling in for a very unknown and mysterious time of Wallace's life. We know he voluntarily gave up his guardianship after his defeat, but as for staying in Scotland fighting the English, the sources would suggest he actually traveled to France to seek the aid of King Philip IV and others for the Scottish cause, but around 1304 Wallace had returned to Scotland. Wallace would be involved in a few more inconsequential skirmishes, but was captured a year later after being turned over to the English by Scottish knight John de Menteith, not Robert the Bruce or his father, who was dead by then anyway. The film shows after Wallace's capture, he is taken to London, tried for high treason, then tortured and executed, refusing throughout to ask for mercy to be given a quick death. It is true that during the trial, Wallace refuted the charge of treason on the grounds that he was never a subject of King Edward. As for asking for mercy, it is a little less true, as we know that after his defeat at Falkirk, he tried to contact the king in hopes of receiving less severe treatment. As for the crimes he was accused of, the film left out that he was charged with, and most certainly guilty of, atrocities against the English people, including killing of women and children and other non-combatants. In the closing scene of the film, Robert leads an army in front of the English for a ceremonial surrender and submission to the king, but then, at the last moment, comes to his senses and leads the Scots into battle. This is known as the Battle of Bannockburn. It was an important victory for the Scots, but it was not a spontaneous event. Robert had been at war with the English for the prior 8 years. Many important plot points of the film are inaccurate or outright false, but the seemingly inconsequential details are just as erroneous. Almost every Scotsman in the film is wearing a belted plaid kilt, despite the fact that kilts would not be worn in Scotland for another few hundred years, and according to experts, the actors were wearing them in a totally incorrect and bizarre way. And there are early sources describing Celts wearing battle paint, most notably by Julius Caesar. However, it is highly unlikely that the tradition persisted into the time of William Wallace. Also, the characterization of the film's protagonist is extraneously heroic, and he has personal relationships with virtually all important players in the war, two especially important, the first being his friendship with Robert the Bruce. Though they would have probably known each other, and Robert did betray both sides more than once, he did not personally betray Wallace, and at the time of his capture, Robert had already permanently switched to the Scottish side. Their friendship was at least based on a plausible one, but Wallace's relationship with Isabella of France borders on the ridiculous. We know for several reasons why there would have been no meeting between the two, let alone a years-long affair. Isabella did not move to England until after Wallace's execution, and even if she did, it would have been highly irregular to send a woman on a diplomatic mission during that time. But perhaps the most glaring inaccuracy of her character is that at the time of the Battle of Falkirk, she was only 3 years old. In the end, Braveheart takes an epic but very gray period of history and confines it to a standard good versus evil story, but an above-average one. It may be one of the most inaccurate movies ever called nonfiction, but it did capture the spirit of the memory. Now, we didn't cover a lot of things. We didn't mention any of the other Scottish lords the movie left out, or the fact that Prima Nocta was probably a myth, and the important plot point that Scotland was actually an independent country for most of Wallace's life. Should we have mentioned any of that? Is there anything else you think we should have included, or anything that you think we should have left out? Let us know, and let us know what other movies you think we should cover. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video. Thank you.